Now, you'll recall that Sustainable Development Goal number 7, Target 1, has two indicators. One on that the world reaches universal access to electricity, which good progress is being made on, exception being some countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And the second indicator is proportion of households with access to clean fuels and technologies, and that largely refers to clean cooking access, although you could also define clean heating access, and then questions arise about the sort of cleanliness of many of the fuels Ireland uses for heating. In any case, this lecture is about access to clean cooking in developing countries, and the reason why this is very much linked to other development goals, there are many reasons for this. First of all, there's a clear and an important intersection between access to energy and gender equality. So while the lack of access to modern and sustainable forms of energy impacts both men and women, inequalities in social standing, in economic capability, in gender-defined roles means that women often suffer from a lack of energy access in disproportionate ways. So in developing countries, women tend to bear the burden for collecting and preparing fuel for cooking, as well as the cooking itself. Households dedicate an average in developing countries of 1.5 hours per day collecting fuel, and that burden is mainly borne by women. Actually, that can cause a very, not just a big time burden, but also a physical burden. Women can carry loads of up to 50 kilograms, and this reliance on traditional uses of biomass over three-stone fires like this means that women and children are the ones most impacted by air pollution as well. You can see that these are very smoky fires, and when you're over kind of preparing a fire for many hours a day and standing over it, it causes a big problem. Women also bear most of the responsibility for household tasks such as cleaning and clothes washing, which take much longer to do without access to modern energy. Here is a graph of the average number of hours spent collecting fuel per day per household in number of surveys in different countries. Countries with a high level of deforestation and low development, the average household can spend up to 5 hours a day collecting. That's only collecting fuel wood. That's not even cooking. Here in Sierra Leone, for example, almost 100% of people in this country rely on biomass for cooking, and that's not in an efficient way. On average across these countries, as I said, the average is 1.5 hours per day. So that causes huge losses to people's potential for earning, potential for livelihood, and so on. So that economic burden and gender aspects are where this sort of access and economic, social, energy linkages are. Health is another area where there's particularly important linkage with energy access. So in the electricity access lecture, I talked about the use of candles and kerosene and other polluting fuels for lighting. That has very serious implications for health, and that is very, very important for the reliance on solid biomass and coal for cooking. And often these are used in enclosed spaces without proper ventilation. And also in urban areas where if there's a lot of fires, it can really cause a lot of ambient air pollution as well, along with traffic and industry. So together, the traditional use of biomass, of coal, kerosene, and so on, the burden is in sub-Saharan Africa, but in contrast with electricity access, there's also a huge burden in developing countries in Asia, with still nearly 500 million people in China relying on solid fuels for cooking, and a lot of that is actually coal, so using coal for cooking, which is particularly polluting. You also see kerosene there being used as a cooking fuel in sub-Saharan Africa and India, and that has a lot of the same harms as lighting, as is used for lighting fuel, so causes burns. Children can ingest kerosene, so that's why it's not considered a clean cooking fuel. And if you see there on the right-hand axis, then that is the number of people every year who the World Health Organization estimate are lose their lives prematurely because of indoor air pollution, and that's because of the high reliance on biomass and coal for cooking. So, in China alone, this is nearly 1 million premature deaths every year. The health burden of that is staggering, and this is just indoor air pollution or air pollution that comes at the household level. It doesn't include air pollution from vehicles, from factories, and from industry, things like that. This is just air pollution at the household level, which is often actually hidden. So a lot of when you see pictures on the news of air pollution in developing countries, you see, you know, smog in big bustling cities, but often the actual biggest health burden is inside houses where you don't have that same impact, and it's also houses in the poorest areas. So what are the types of cook stoves that are used, and what are the solutions? And these sort of cook stoves and the solutions span a much wider range of solutions than electricity access. In some ways, it's a bit more complex than that. So cook stoves span a spectrum of technologies and vary widely according to local practices, local conditions, local fuels, and that prevents neat categorization of different cook stove. So there's no universal sort of categorization of cook stove types, but you know, you can say the traditional cooking is typically over 3 stones. They're called 3 stone fires, and this is how, I suppose, humanity evolved to cook, to extract, you know, nutrients out of food. But still, billions of people across the world still use this extremely basic rudimentary technology, if you could call it that. So the open fires, the pots are made using locally available low-cost material like stones, ceramic, clay, and bricks. And the types of fuels that are used are wood or charcoal. Charcoal is also made with biomass and can cause a lot of deforestation. Agricultural residues, that's waste like straw, grass, things like that. They have a low efficiency, so very little of the heat in the fuel is converted to heat for cooking. So it requires a lot more of the fuel and a lot longer time. And high particulate matter, PM, which infects the lungs. Methane can also be emitted, which is a potent greenhouse gas, as you know now. So gathering firewood can cause deforestation, especially the production of charcoal, which requires lots of biomass to produce. Charcoal is often used and even marketed in urban areas, so it's kind of transported from forests, causing deforestation, to urban areas because charcoal is more energy dense. It's easier to transport and sell and so on. So moving on, the sort of the first step up the energy access rung is usually what we call an improved biomass cook stove. This is some sort of form of technology which improves the combustion, the airflow, the efficiency of biomass. The input fuel is the same. It's still charcoal, wood, agricultural residue, but the difference is that there is some sort of airflow which improves the combustion. So typically they're higher efficiency, lower particulate matter than traditional stoves. They can include a chimney. You know, if you improve the ventilation in a room, that obviously reduces the smoke. They can include forced air, so electricity driving a fan, which will improve the combustion, or a closed combustion chamber. A rocket stove, for example, you might have encountered when you're camping or something like that. This is an example of a rocket stove. It has an L-shaped combustion chamber that improves the combustion of gases and smoke. These can be either centrally mass-produced or locally produced, depending on the context. And this is often, when you talk about, you know, charities and development organizations providing clean cooking access, this is often the sort of solution that is given. But still, the emissions from these improved biomass cook stoves can still be very problematic. There's different types of improved biomass cook stoves. These are called plancha or griddle stoves, depending on where the world you are. These are designed for areas of the world where the kind of cuisine requires a hot, flat surface, like to, I don't know, cook kind of flatbreads, things like that. And they're designed to enclose the fire and use these flue gases to make this efficient cooking. And there's often a chimney as well to vent the emissions. Again, here, like one thing that's very important when it comes to clean cooking solutions as well, it really depends on the local cuisine and the local practices, which are quite hard to move away from. Another type of stove is a gasifier stove. So these force the gases and smoke that result from the incomplete combustion back into the flame until there's almost complete combustion. So this is also known as a top lift updraft stove because the fuel is lit from the top of the stove. And they often include a fan to improve that mix of flame, gas, and smoke and reduce emissions. But it's very important to note that for a clean cooking fuel to be sustainable and for it to be a long-term solution, it needs to be affordable, to be well developed, and have a kind of have a secure supply route, and also to involve the safe use of high quality cooking equipment. So just gaining access to the equipment itself is not the end of the story. You need secure access to the fuel if you've got a different form of fuel. And that's very pertinent when we talk about this class of cook stoves, so gas, biogas, or LPG. And that actually, myself, I have bottled LPG. I've a bottle like this outside, and we have a hob which uses gas like this. So this is a very common cooking fuel in many parts of the world. And basically, the properties of these types of gas are that they are very efficient and very clean burning, even in these low pressure gas burners. So LPG is delivered to a house. It needs a market. It needs, import into a country. It needs a well supplied market, and it's delivered in these gas bottles. It's often more accessible in urban areas. A big problem with supplying rural areas is often even the roads don't exist to bring the fuel there. So as I said, to increase the use of LPG, the availability and affordability are challenges that need to be addressed. So it's not just availability in terms of there being a market and someone being able to sell you the good, but affordability, the ongoing fuel requirements, and deposit for the gas canister are big barriers. Biogas is one sort of very interesting sustainable solution which can be produced from household or community level plants. So if you get a biogas digester and you have, say, manure from cows or agricultural residues that can be produced into methane, so you've got this sort of circular economy at the local level, which is very nice. But that again requires a lot of local knowledge, expertise, and so on. Another type of stove there is ethanol or alcohol, which ethanol is a liquid biofuel that can be made from different sugary materials. It's used as a replacement for petrol in cars, mixed in. It can be made from starchy materials like potatoes, maize, cellulosic materials, and it's basically alcohol. It's fermented carbohydrates. So there's different feedstocks that can be used to produce alcohol stoves as well, and they're relatively clean burning, but again can be expensive, requiring supply chains, things like that. Another two types of cook stoves there. One is a solar cook stove. That's literally, you've got a hot country, hot sunny day, you've got a big round mirror and you concentrate the sun's rays into an area. So a lot of these areas, solar energy is very abundant, and there's different types of these things. Usually they're a panel in this shape, convex shape, which encloses a pot and boils. They have zero emissions. They're very efficient. But they typically require changes to how a household cooks. So if you're used to cooking your cuisine over a flame and you have to move to a pot, that requires very different behavior, and often different multiple devices are required to meet a household's needs. A final type of cook stove there is electric or induction cook stove. So this can be a very, very efficient way of using electricity. You need the right kind of pot though. These are increasingly being used in high income countries as well. And they're a very nice way of using electricity if electricity is available. One important thing though is a lot of people will say that, well, there far more people have electricity access than clean cooking access. So that means that, why can't they just use electricity to fuel their cooking? That's one of the first questions that you get often. And the reasons for that are many. First of all, affordability. So electricity is often just very expensive. Second is reliability. In many people who have an electricity connection, it will be gone for several hours a day randomly and without warning. So you need basically a reliable fuel source. The alternative, which is usually biomass, is often free. Hard to move away from a free thing to a paid thing when you've got very little income. And the next question is around improved cook stoves, because if I can spend €40 on a device like a rocket stove to half the amount of biomass that I need and reduce the health implications, why wouldn't I do that? But there's ambiguity as to whether these improved cook stoves are clean, because many models are associated with household air pollutions at levels that are still very harmful to human health. So for this reason, we say that when we're counting universal or progress towards universal clean cooking access, improved cook stoves are not considered to be clean cooking access. In the future, they can form a very important part of the solution. There's a lot of research about improving the design, improving the usage, and working with communities to make sure that these cook stoves are designed for their purposes. And it will have to be part of the solution to 2030 if we are to reach that 2030 target, because electricity, LPG, biogas cannot reach every part of especially rural Africa, where the populations are very dispersed and markets don't exist. So these, what we call advanced biomass cook stoves, can contain even better technical improvements, which can increase the combustion efficiency and lower pollutant emissions. And these will usually have a forced draft and a blower to improve the performance of the stove. So in developing countries, looking at the trends in access to clean cooking, only 35% of the population of developing countries had access to clean cooking in 2000. That's up to 51% in 2015. So that's already very, very significant improvements, but there's still an increase in the number of people without access to clean cooking because of strong population growth. You can see here that sub-Saharan Africa has the highest share of people without access to clean cooking. So it's the area here that relates to the number of people without access. China here has around 20% of people without access, but a larger population than sub-Saharan Africa. So it still has an awful lot of people without access. India there is very significant as well. So in India, around 780 million people are estimated to rely on biomass for cooking, in contrast with the huge strides made in providing electricity access. But at the same time, the government is really improving access to LPG, giving subsidies, and so on. And if we break those numbers down across different years, as I said, around 2.7 billion people didn't have access in 2000, and there have been some improvements in policies, people gaining access. Most notably, if you look at the reduction, basically people gaining access, it's mainly been in China and in developing countries in Asia, especially people moving away from kerosene. But population growth in lots of countries, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, has meant that in 2015 the number is about steady. So basically population growth has offset a lot of the improvements that have been made because of policy. So if we look to the future, as I said, there hasn't been huge progress in terms of the number of people without access to clean cooking reducing. In the central scenario, the new policy scenario, we look at every country and commitments made and so on. Because of a lot of progress being made in India, developing countries in Asia, around 2.3 billion people remain without access in 2030, and in the Energy for All case, to deliver clean cooking to all those people, we modelled and assessed the optimal cooking fuel, and basically all clean fuels and technologies used in this Energy for All case are needed. So improved biomass, LPG, gas, that's often in urban areas, and electricity access. The huge improvement that can be made in this, it can lower premature deaths related to household air pollution from 2.5 to 0.7 million deaths annually in 2030. So that is an extremely good use of money if you can encourage households to move away from biomass for cooking. So if we look at the trade-offs between different types of fuels, this is one reason why clean cooking access is not so easy to encourage. It's because there's no sort of silver bullet when it comes to different technologies. So, traditional biomass is the stove cost and the fuel cost, and are low and it's relatively reliable, but it has a very bad health impact and it's terrible for gender equality. It can have a bad environmental impact if it causes deforestation, and sometimes fuel availability is not so good. If we look down at these different options, basically there's no option where all the buttons are green. There's trade-offs and choices and local contexts that are important. For example, if we look at electricity, it can be fairly cheap, the stove, but electricity per kilowatt hour can be very expensive, and if the electricity is being switched off randomly, it's not a reliable source. It's great for health, it's great for gender equality, it has a low environmental impact, especially if it's with renewables, and the fuel availability is mixed. So basically there's no sort of silver bullet when it comes to clean cook stoves. But what experience with different clean cooking programs give us are 5 lessons. First of all, to go local, to understand the local context, convince people of the benefits. A lot of people don't actually see the problem with the existing methods they have. Engage women, obviously the main users, monitor the program and adapt as necessary, and use a subsidy to provide alternatives when possible. The next slide is just to illustrate that affordability can be a really significant barrier. So here, just to break this down for you, are for examples in Kenya and in India, 2 different contexts with different biomass, different cook stove types, and comparing the upfront cost of the stove against the days of income of someone living on the poverty line, which is $1.10 a day. So even a basic improved biomass cook stove here in Kenya and India can cost around 15 days worth of income. When you're kind of struggling to put food on the table, just to put 10 days of income into a basic improved cook stove can be prohibitive. But here you can see in India there's a subsidy in terms of the cost, and that brings down the cost to below the cost of traditional biomass. Here, the dollars, this is basically like a levelized cost of cooking each meal, and it includes the opportunity cost of people going out and gathering the fuel wood. You can see that when you include the opportunity cost, that's the money that people could have spent on income generation, the traditional basically stove can be one of the highest, especially in India here. One thing about clean cooking programs as well is that progress can relatively easily be reversed. So if people gain access to something like LPG, they can revert back to biomass relatively quickly. For example, a recently published study in 2000 following the COVID crisis looked at that reversal of progress in households in Nairobi, and found that 95% of households surveyed basically adjusted their cooking patterns. So nearly 15% of houses that had been using LPG as a primary cooking fuel prior to the COVID-19 crisis reverted to purchasing kerosene, and another 13% switched to gathering firewood to meet their needs. This is because of affordability and accessibility problems. So you can see that the COVID crisis has had kind of knock-on consequences across the world. So just to reiterate that when taking into account this opportunity cost, that is the time people could spend doing something else, of gathering wood, improved cook stoves may present an overall saving compared with traditional stoves. However, there's many challenges still exist. Those include that even the cheapest cook stoves can represent several weeks of household income, and they need to prioritize that income for other needs like food. Fuel wood is free, and income generating opportunities might be limited. Access to alternatives like LPG or electricity may be limited, and even when they have alternatives, they may switch back to using biomass when there's issues. Cultural factors and cuisine and habit are also important, and this is why many programs aimed at improving clean cooking facilities have underperformed relative to what they would have expected. So I want to leave you with some of the high-level conclusions that we had from this Energy for All case. Basically, the tagline is realizing energy for all won't cost the earth. It shows that if we do invest in these clean cooking, in this universal electricity access solutions, the benefits of achieving this 2030 SDG 7.1 target far outweigh the costs. So it would cost about 1.9% of increased global energy investment. That is about $31 billion per year, which sounds like a lot, but last year we invested, or in 2016, the year before this report, around 300 billion was invested in renewables. So about 10% of what was invested in renewables, if it was invested in clean cooking and electricity access, would realize many of the benefits. The video games industry, for example, the revenues were 70 billion. You can achieve this with by gaining around 2 months of work per year per woman. This is the equivalent of freeing up the workforce of about 80 million people. That's half the size of the labor force of the US every year. So you'd unleash this new workforce to be able to put their efforts to more productive things and more interesting things. You'd save 1.8 million premature deaths every year. That's a staggering health benefit, and you can achieve this with no net increase in greenhouse gas emissions. And that is often the most kind of surprising finding, but like the absolute amount of energy and emissions gained as a result of this quite small amount of energy use at a household level can be offset by basically reducing the methane associated with using biomass and deforestation for clean cooking, which is already significant. So in summary, this agreement of the Sustainable Development Goals show that there's worldwide acceptance that, we can't have a world where preparing just a meal is a grave health danger, or that children don't have adequate light to do their homework at night, or that villages don't have access to modern fuels to have services and industry. So there's a need to rally around this 2030 goal. Another big insight is that the cost declines in solar and energy efficiency as spillover from our innovations on climate action are opening new and viable routes for rural electrification, strategies to leave no one behind. We have to put women at the heart of delivering solutions, and also we need to elevate clean cooking on the political agenda, because when you talk about energy access and development, often it's only electricity which is considered, but obviously clean cooking creates a really substantial problem. Fourthly, climate goals and energy access goals are not in conflict, they're complementary. This is a key finding. And the implications are, sorry, I'm coughing. The implications are that the climate community needs to rally around this goal and not limit the achievement of universal energy access for climate reasons. These goals are not in conflict. And so the really motto of the SDG is to leave no one behind, and the IEA have done really great work in leading that agenda.